the same slow speeds followed by a sudden burst of speed. One target was clocked at 7,000 miles an hour. By now, the targets had moved into every sector of the scope and had flown through the prohibited flying areas over the White House and the Capitol. Several times during the night, the targets passed close to commercial airliners in the area, and on 2 occasions, the pilots of the airliners saw lights that they couldn't identify, and the lights were in the same spots where the radar showed UFOs to be. Other pilots to whom the ARTC radar men talked on the radio didn't see anything odd, at least that's what they said, but the senior controller knew airline pilots and knew that they were very reluctant to report UFOs. The first sighting of a light by an airline pilot took place shortly after midnight when an ARTC controller called the pilot of a Capital Airlines flight just taking off from National. The controller asked the pilot to keep watch for unusual lights, or anything. Soon after the pilot cleared the traffic pattern, and while ARTC was still in contact with him, he suddenly yelled, "There's one, off to the right, and there it goes." The controller had been watching the scope, and a target that had been off to the right of the Capital liner was gone. During the next 14 minutes, this pilot reported. About 2 hours later, another pilot, approaching National Airport from the south, excitedly called the control tower to report that a light was following him at 8 o'clock level. The tower checked their radar scope, and there was a target behind and to the left of the airliner. The ARTC radar also had the airliner and the UFO target. The UFO tagged along behind and to the left of the airliner until it was within 4 miles of touchdown on the runway. When the pilot reported the light was leaving, the 2 radar scopes showed that the target was pulling away from the airliner. Once during the night, all 3 radars, the 2 at Washington and the 1 at Andrews Air Force Base, picked up a target 3 miles north of the Riverdale radio beacon, north of Washington. For 30 seconds, the 3 radar operators compared notes about the target over the intercom. Then suddenly the target was gone, and it left all 3 radar scopes simultaneously. But the clincher came in the wee hours of the morning when an ARTC traffic controller called the control tower at Andrews Air Force Base and told the tower operators that ARTC had a target just south of their tower, directly over the Andrews radio range station. The tower operators looked, and there was a huge fiery orange sphere hovering in the sky directly over their range station. Not too long after this excitement had started, in fact, just after the technician had checked the radar and found that the targets weren't caused by a radar malfunction, ARTC had called for Air Force interceptors to come in and look around. But they didn't show, and finally ARTC called again, then again. Finally, just about daylight, an F-94 arrived, but by that time the targets were gone. The F-94 crew searched the area for a few minutes, but they couldn't find anything unusual, so they returned to their base. So ended Phase 1 of the Washington National sightings. The Bolling Air Force Base intelligence officer said he would write up the complete report and forward it to ATIC. That afternoon, things bustled in the Pentagon. Down on the first floor, Al Chop was doing his best to stave off the press, while up on the 4th floor, intelligence officers were holding some serious conferences. There was talk of temperature inversions and the false targets they could cause, but the consensus was that a good radar operator could spot inversion-caused targets, and the traffic controllers who operated the radar at Washington National Airport weren't just out of radar school. Every day the lives of thousands of people depended upon their interpretation of the radar targets they saw on their scopes. And you don't get a job like this unless you've spent a good many years watching a luminous line paint targets on a good many radar scopes. Targets caused by inversions aren't rare. In the years that these men had been working with radar, they had undoubtedly seen every kind of target, real or false, that radar can detect. They had told the Bolling Air Force Base intelligence officer that the targets they saw were caused by the radar waves bouncing off a hard, solid object. The Air Force radar operator at Andrews backed them up. So did two veteran airline pilots who saw lights right where the radar showed a UFO to be. Then on top of all this, there were the reports from the Washington area during the previous 2 weeks. All good, all from airline pilots or equally reliable people. To say the least, the sightings at Washington National was a jolt. Besides trying to figure out what the Washington National UFOs were, we had the problem of what to tell the press. They were now beginning to put on a squeeze by threatening to call a congressman, and nothing chills blood faster in the military. They wanted some kind of an official statement, and they wanted it soon. Some people in intelligence wanted to say just, "We don't know," but others held out for a more thorough investigation. I happen to be in this latter category. Many times in the past, I had seen what first seemed to be a good UFO report completely fall apart under a thorough investigation. I was forestalling the press and working all night if necessary to go into every aspect of the sighting. But to go along with the theme of the Washington National sightings, confusion, there was a lot of talk but no action, and the afternoon passed with no further investigation. Finally, about 4:00 p.m., it was decided that the press, who still wanted an official comment, would get an official no comment, and that I would stay in Washington and make a more detailed investigation. I called Lieutenant Andy Flews, who was in charge of Project Blue Book while I was gone, to tell him that I was staying over, and I found out that they were in a deluxe flat back in Dayton. Reports were pouring out of the teletype machines at the rate of 30 a day, and many were as good, if not better, than the Washington incident. I talked this over with Colonel Bauer, and we decided that even though things were popping back at ATIC, the Washington sighting, from the standpoint of national interest, was more important. Feeling like a national martyr, because I planned to work all night if necessary, I laid the course of my investigation. I would go to Washington National Airport, Andrews Air Force Base, airlines offices, the Weather Bureau, and a half-dozen other places scattered all over the capital city. I called the transport staff car, but it took me only seconds to find out that the regulations said no staff cars except for senior colonels or generals. Colonel Bauer tried. Same thing. General Samford and General Garland were gone, so I couldn't get them to try to pressure a staff car out of the hillbilly who was dispatching vehicles. I went down to the finance office. Could I rent a car and charge it as travel expense? No. City buses are available. But I didn't know the bus system, and it could take me hours to get to all the places I had to visit, I pleaded. You can take a cab if you want to pay for it out of your per diem, was the answer. $9 a day per diem, and I should pay for a hotel room, meals, and taxi fares all over the District of Columbia. Besides, the lady in finance told me, my travel orders to Washington covered only a visit to the Pentagon. In addition, she said, I was supposed to be on my way back to Dayton right now, and if I didn't go through all the red tape of getting the orders amended, I couldn't collect any per diem, and technically I'd be AWOL. I couldn't talk to the finance officer, the lady informed me, because he always left at 4:30 to avoid the traffic, and it was now exactly 5 o'clock, and she was quitting. At 5:01, I decided that if saucers were buzzing Pennsylvania Avenue in formation, I couldn't care less. I called Colonel Bauer, explained my troubles, and said that I was through. He concurred, and I caught the next airliner to Dayton. When I returned, I dropped in to see Captain Roy James in the radar branch and told him about the sighting. He said that he thought it sounded as if the radar targets had been caused by weather, but since he didn't have the finer details, he naturally couldn't make any definite evaluation. The good UFO reports that Lieutenant Flues had told me about when I called him from Washington had tripled in number before I got around to looking at them. Our daily take had risen to 40 a day, and about a third of them were classified as unknowns. More amber-red lights like those seen on July 18th had been observed over the guided missile long-range proving ground at Patrick Air Force Base, Florida. In Uvalde, Texas, a UFO described as a large, round, silver object that spun on its vertical axis was seen to cross 100 degrees of afternoon sky in 48 seconds. During part of its flight, it passed between two towering cumulus clouds. At Los Alamos and Holyoke, Massachusetts, jets had chased UFOs. In both cases, the UFOs had been lost as they turned into the sun. In two night encounters, one in New Jersey and one in Massachusetts, F-94s tried unsuccessfully to intercept unidentified lights reported by the Ground Observer Corps. In both cases, the pilots of the radar-nosed jet interceptors saw a light. They closed in and their radar operators got a lock-on. But the lock-ons were broken in a few seconds in both cases, as the light apparently took violent evasive maneuvers. Copies of these and other reports were going to the Pentagon, and I was constantly on the phone or having teleconferences with Major Fournet. When the second Washington National sighting came along, almost a week to the hour from the first one, by a stroke of luck, things weren't too fouled up. The method of reporting the sighting didn't exactly follow the official reporting procedures that are set forth in Air Force Letter 200-5, dated 5 April 1952, subject, Reporting of Unidentified Flying Objects, but it worked. I first heard about the sighting about 10 o'clock in the evening when I received a telephone call from Bob Ginna, Life magazine's UFO expert. He had gotten the word from Life's Washington News Bureau and wanted a statement about what the Air Force planned to do. I decided that instead of giving a mysterious no comment, I would tell the truth. I have no idea what the Air Force is doing. In all probability, it's doing nothing. When he hung up, I called the intelligence duty officer in the Pentagon, and I was correct. Intelligence hadn't heard about the sighting. I asked the duty officer to call Major Fournet and ask him if he would go out to the airport, which was only 2 or 3 miles from his home.